Noah Kendrick opened his eyes, but the world around him felt stranger than any nightmare he could have imagined. The rhythmic, almost suffocating sound of machines and the hospital's scents, mixed with the fragrance of cheap soap, only amplified his disorientation. His muscles were weak, and even lifting a hand felt like a losing battle. It wasn't just the time he had lost during the 6-month coma. It was the overwhelming sensation that everything he once knew had changed in a cruel and irreversible way. The nurse, a calm-looking woman named Grace, helped him grasp the basics. He had been in a severe car accident, but Noah's confusion only deepened. What should have been a slow return to reality turned into something much darker when he accidentally overheard a conversation he wasn't meant to. Fragments of words, missing documents, they divided everything, echoed in Noah's already fragile mind like a disturbing riddle that seemed directed at him. Who were they? What had they done while he was gone? More importantly, what had he lost while trapped in that forced slumber? Anger began to rise slowly behind his vulnerable facade, but before he could focus on it, fear took its place. If the people he trusted most had betrayed him, who could he really call an ally? Each question seemed to lead to another, even more terrifying one. And deep in his mind, a grim certainty began to take shape. Waking up wasn't a return to safety. It was the beginning of something far more dangerous. Noah Kendrick felt like his mind was a tangle of loose wires. He tried to piece together fragments of his memory, but each attempt seemed interrupted by the glaring reality around him. The hospital room, with its pristine white walls and cold fluorescent lights, was a cruel reminder that his life was no longer the same. He tried to speak, but his throat was dry, and the words came out as muffled sounds. Nurse Grace, with her perpetually calm expression, approached with a glass of water. "Take it easy, Mr. Kendrick," she said, her voice soft but laden with care. "You're waking up from a long coma. Your body will need time to recover." Grace slowly explained that he had been in a nearly fatal car accident. His vehicle had skidded on a rainy road, crashing into a concrete barrier. The intensity of the impact had left him with multiple fractures, internal injuries, and a brain hemorrhage that plunged him into a coma. As she spoke, Noah tried to absorb the information, but it felt like he was hearing about someone else's life. 6 months, he murmured, incredulous. The idea that 6 months of his life had vanished was unbearable. "And my family?" Grace hesitated, and that was enough for Noah to sense something was wrong. "Don't worry about that now, Mr. Kendrick. Your body needs to recover first." But unease was growing inside him. Where was Victoria, his wife, and Charles, his best friend and business partner? Why wasn't anyone by his side at such a critical moment? Each time he asked, Grace deflected the conversation to another topic, as if there was something she couldn't or wouldn't tell him. The following days were a blur of painful physical therapy, endless tests, and uncomfortable silences. When he finally had enough strength to hold a fork on his own, Grace decided he was ready to receive visitors. Yet no one came. Noah began to suspect that something deeper was at play. That night, unable to sleep, he lay still as he heard Grace on the phone in the hallway. The tone of her voice, usually calm and comforting, was now laced with tension. "I already told you I don't know where the documents are," she whispered, but the hospital's quietness carried her words all the way to Noah. "They divided everything while he was gone. I didn't have a choice." The words cut like a knife. Noah closed his eyes, pretending to sleep, as every detail of that conversation seeped into his mind like poison. Divided everything? Were they talking about him? Grace, the only person who seemed to be on his side, knew something about what had happened in the past months. When she returned to the room, Noah kept his eyes shut, his heart pounding. For the first time since waking up, it wasn't the physical pain that bothered him. He was consumed by something far greater, the certainty that he had been betrayed while he was defenseless. But by whom? And why? One thing was clear in his mind. He had to uncover the truth, even if it meant confronting the abyss of his new reality. That morning, Noah woke up with a determination he hadn't felt since opening his eyes had become a struggle. He pretended to be weaker than he actually was, a strategy to observe and listen. Grace entered with her mild smile, carrying the breakfast tray. "Today will be a good day, Mr. Kendrick. Physical therapy is showing incredible results. Soon, you'll be walking without assistance," she said, adjusting his pillow to make him more comfortable. He forced a smile, but his mind was racing. Every move Grace made seemed suspicious now. Every gesture carried a weight he couldn't ignore. As he finished breakfast, he seized the opportunity to probe her. "Grace, don't take this the wrong way, but where's my wife? Victoria knows I'm here, right? And Charles, he should be handling the company. Have you heard anything from them?" Grace froze for a brief moment. The pause was fleeting, but enough for Noah to notice her discomfort. "They are busy, Mr. Kendrick. I imagine it's hard for them to process everything that's happened, but I'm sure they'll visit you soon." Noah didn't press further. He knew Grace was hiding something, and the memory of the phone conversation only confirmed his suspicions. The problem was that he was too weak to do anything other than piece together fragments of the puzzle in his mind. He needed to be patient, though every minute in bed felt like torture. Later that same night, he heard Grace speaking on the phone in the hallway again. This time, he strained to catch every word. "No, I'm not getting involved anymore," she whispered, a mix of irritation and fear in her tone. "What they've done has already gone too far. He's awake and he's starting to ask questions. I don't know how much longer I can keep my composure." Noah's heart raced. Grace was directly involved, but she seemed regretful, or at least reluctant to continue. He gripped the sheets tightly, as if it might contain the explosion of emotions within him. When Grace re-entered the room, he shut his eyes, feigning sleep. For the first time, anger outweighed the pain. In the days that followed, Noah realized he couldn't trust Grace, but he needed her. He began observing her shifts and habits, waiting for the right moment to act. Meanwhile, his mind remained fixated on one question. What had they done during the 6 months he was gone? The answer came sooner than he expected. The next evening, while Grace was away, he noticed an envelope left on the table beside his bed. Inside were medical notes and receipts. But among the papers, one detail stood out. A folded note with Charles's name and a phone number. Noah's blood boiled. Charles, his business partner, was somehow involved. He clenched the paper in his hands, feeling a wave of desperation mixed with fury. Something was being carefully hidden from him, but this was only the beginning. With effort, he slipped the note under his pillow before Grace returned. The next day, as Grace helped him with physical therapy, Noah began testing how much she knew. "Grace," he started casually, "do you know how my company is doing? I heard Charles has been running everything on his own." Grace hesitated, and for a brief moment Noah saw a mix of guilt and tension in her eyes. Yes, Mr. Kendrick. He's been taking good care of things. But don't worry about that now. Let's focus on your recovery." It was the confirmation Noah needed. Grace knew far more than she admitted, and Charles, his longtime friend, seemed to be at the center of it all. But pieces of the puzzle were still missing, and Noah knew he'd have to leave the hospital to find them. However, an idea began to take root in his mind. He didn't yet have all the answers, but he had something more important: the certainty that the people he trusted most were against him. Noah Kendrick decided that to survive the new world awaiting him, he needed to be cunning. The pieces of the puzzle were slowly coming together, and each discovery was more painful than the last. Grace remained his only connection to the outside world, but her presence, once comforting, was now a constant reminder of betrayal. He knew she was hiding important secrets, but at the same time, she was essential to helping him regain the physical strength needed to leave that bed and face whatever was happening. The next morning, as Grace adjusted the machines beside his bed, Noah finally risked a more direct approach. "Grace, what exactly happened during these 6 months? Don't tell me everything was peaceful. Why hasn't anyone come to visit me? Not my wife? Not Charles?" Grace froze for a moment, her eyes fixed on the machine. The silence that followed was deafening. She finally responded, but her voice was almost inaudible. I don't know all the details, Mr. Kendrick. I'm just doing my job here." "Just your job?" Noah's voice carried a mix of exhaustion and bitterness. "You've been taking care of me for months, but it seems like you know much more about my life than I do." Grace sighed, finishing her adjustments to the monitors before turning to face him. "Mr. Kendrick, there are things you're not ready to hear. Not yet. What you need right now is to rest and focus on your recovery." Noah knew that pressing the issue further might raise suspicion, so he let the matter drop. But he now had a new objective: to uncover exactly what was being hidden from him. That afternoon, while Grace left to retrieve his medications, he saw an opportunity. Carefully, he felt around in the drawer of the bedside table and found the note he had hidden. The handwriting was clear and formal. Charles's name accompanied by a phone number. Taking a deep breath, he decided to take a risk. Noah used the hospital room phone to call the number. After a few rings, a familiar voice answered. "Hello?" It was Charles, his tone casual as if he were speaking to an old friend. Noah struggled to contain his anger. "Charles, it's me, Noah." The silence on the other end of the line was almost tangible. After a few seconds, Charles responded, but his voice was different, colder. "Noah, you're awake?" "Yes, and I need to know what the hell is going on. Grace is hiding something, and you haven't shown up once in these past months. What's happened to my company? And Victoria?" Charles hesitated, but before he could answer, Noah heard another voice in the background, familiar and sharp. "Victoria." "Who is it, Charles?" she asked, her tone impatient. Noah felt the blood drain from his face. His own wife was with Charles. He had suspected betrayal, but hearing it confirmed was like a knife to the chest. Charles stammered, trying to come up with an excuse. It's just a client, Vic. Nothing important." He hung up abruptly. Noah sat there, staring at the phone, the weight of betrayal crushing his chest. His wife and his business partner were together. They had abandoned him during the months he was trapped in a coma, and now it was clear they were working together to push him out of his own life. Grace returned shortly after, carrying a tray of medications. Noah kept his composure, but his mind was a whirlwind. He needed to get out of there. His betrayers were out there, living their lives as if he were dead, and from what he had overheard from Grace, they had divided his assets, possibly even his company. All of this while he had been fighting to survive. That night, Noah began to formulate a plan. He needed allies, but he didn't know who to trust. Grace still seemed like a vital piece of the puzzle, but her connection to Charles and Victoria's secrets made her dangerous. As he stared at the hospital ceiling, one thing became certain. He was no longer the man who had slipped into a coma. The betrayal had changed him. And just as they had planned to take him out of the picture, he would make his own plans, to take back what was his, no matter the cost. The next morning, Noah woke up with a clear purpose. He knew Grace was more than just a nurse. She was a keeper of secrets that could change everything. Yet there was something in her expression, a mix of guilt and hesitation, that made him believe she could be persuaded to help him. He waited for the right moment, carefully observing her every move while pretending to be weaker than he actually was. During the afternoon shift, Grace entered the room with her usual composed expression. Noah decided to act. "Grace," he began, his voice low, almost a whisper. "I know you know what's going on. Don't lie to me. I need your help." She froze mid-motion, a pill in her hand. Her eyes met his, and for the first time, Noah saw her facade waver. I don't know what you're talking about, Mr. Kendrick," she said, but the lack of conviction in her voice was obvious. "Yes, you do," Noah insisted more firmly. "I heard you on the phone. I heard you talking about missing documents and people dividing something while I was gone. If you truly want to help me, tell me the truth." Grace set the pill down on the table and crossed her arms. "It's not that simple, Mr. Kendrick. You have no idea what's at stake." "Then tell me." "I've lost 6 months of my life, Grace. My wife and my business partner, the two people I trusted most, abandoned me. They're together now, conspiring, and you know it. I need answers." Grace let out a deep sigh, as if weighing whether she could trust him. Finally, she sat down in the chair beside the bed. "I knew this day would come," she said, her voice low and filled with regret. "Yes, I know what happened, but I wasn't part of it willingly." Noah said nothing, waiting for her to continue. "When you went into a coma, your wife and your business partner took the opportunity to seize control of everything. Victoria claimed you were unfit to manage your affairs and started selling off your assets. Charles supported her every decision, and together, they practically destroyed everything you built. They even forged documents to declare you dead." Her voice trembled on the last word. Noah felt as though the ground had disappeared beneath him. Dead. They had declared him dead while he was still breathing. "And you?" he asked, his voice heavy with suspicion. "What was your role in all of this?" Grace lowered her eyes. "I knew what was happening, but I didn't know how to stop it. They paid me to take care of you, but the truth is, I was also paid to stay silent. I didn't want to be involved, but I needed the money. And when you woke up, I knew it was only a matter of time before you found out everything." There was a long silence between them. Noah wrestled with his anger, trying to decide if he could trust her. "Why are you telling me this now?" he finally asked. Grace looked him in the eye, and for the first time, he saw sincerity there. "Because I'm tired of being used by them. And because, despite everything, you deserve to know the truth." In the days that followed, Grace began helping him in secret. She brought documents from the hospital office, including financial records that showed suspicious transfers made by Victoria and Charles. Even though Noah was still weak, he began piecing the puzzle together. He discovered that his mansion had been sold, his bank account was nearly empty, and his company was now in Charles's hands. But there was more. One document in particular caught his attention. A contract indicating that Charles had acquired a new property using the company's name. It was a multi-million-dollar investment that should have required Noah's approval, but he had obviously been left out of the equation. "This is a lead," Noah told Grace. "If we can prove that Charles and Victoria used my absence to enrich themselves, we can take them down." "But you can't do this alone," Grace replied. "You're still weak, and they have allies. You'll need more evidence." Noah knew she was right. He would need time and allies to confront the two of them. But now he had something he didn't have before. An unexpected ally in Grace and an unshakable determination to reclaim what was his. "They think they buried me," he said, looking at the papers on the table beside his bed. "But they forgot I'm still here, and I'll make every one of them pay for this." Noah Kendrick was finally discharged. He left the hospital in a wheelchair, with Grace by his side. Though he had regained much of his strength, the world outside seemed far more threatening than he remembered. As the taxi took them to a discreet hotel Grace had booked, Noah watched the city streets with wary eyes. It felt as though he were a ghost passing through a place he once knew intimately, but now found unrecognizable. Grace helped him into the hotel room, a simple but functional space. He looked at the neatly made bed, the basic furniture, and the absence of any luxury. It was a stark contrast to the life he had left behind. His mansion, his impressive office, the luxury cars, all of it felt like a distant dream now. "Do you need anything?" Grace asked as she placed the documents they had gathered on the table. Noah shook his head. "I just need a moment to process all of this." Grace nodded and left to fetch some supplies. Noah took the opportunity to inspect the papers again. Among them, he found something he had overlooked, a printed email sent by Charles to Victoria. The words were cold, almost corporate, but carried a dark undertone. "With the sale of the mansion and the transfer complete, we are in a position to consolidate the investment. The question now is ensuring he stays out of the way." Noah read the last sentence over and over. Ensuring he stays out of the way. The words echoed in his mind like a warning. This wasn't just financial betrayal. They had conspired to keep him out of the picture, perhaps permanently. Grace returned shortly after, carrying a small bag of groceries. "I got the basics for you. We need to move cautiously until we decide our next step." "Grace," Noah said, looking at her firmly. "They tried to erase me. This wasn't just about money. They wanted me gone for good." Grace sat down across from him, her face pale. "I feared as much. There were things Charles mentioned on the phone about how your absence was convenient, but I never thought they'd go this far." "They did," Noah replied, "and I'm not going to stand by while they continue to enjoy what's mine." Noah knew he needed to face the world, even though he was still physically fragile. Grace provided him with simple clothing, nothing that would attract attention. His first destination was his old mansion, now occupied by an unfamiliar couple. He stood outside, watching the property that had once been a symbol of his success. Seeing the imposing gate now guarding strangers was a bitter reminder of how he had been discarded. From there, he went to his former company, now rebranded with a more generic name. When he tried to enter, the security guard stopped him. "Can I help you?" the man asked, his expression devoid of recognition. "I'm Noah Kendrick," Noah replied, hoping the name still held some weight. The guard narrowed his eyes. "I'm sorry, sir, but your name isn't on the board of directors. If you need assistance, you'll have to contact customer support." The humiliation burned like fire. Noah realized it wasn't just his wealth that had been taken from him. His identity as a businessman, a leader, and a visionary had also been stripped away. Back at the hotel, Noah gathered his strength to devise a plan. Grace brought him a laptop, and together they began investigating Charles and Victoria's financial movements. It was slow and meticulous work, but each discovery strengthened Noah's resolve. "Look at this," Grace said, pointing to a bank statement. "Charles transferred a large sum to an offshore account just before you woke up." "And Victoria?" Noah asked, his jaw tight. Grace hesitated before answering. "She used part of the money to buy shares in an emerging tech company. It looks like she's preparing for a new life without you." The words hit Noah like a punch, but he refused to back down. "They underestimated what I'm capable of," he said, his eyes fixed on the laptop. "That was their mistake." Grace looked at him, visibly concerned. "Noah, you need to be careful. They have the resources and the influence now. Don't underestimate what they can do if they realize you're back in the game." Noah met her gaze, a mixture of gratitude and anger in his eyes. "They might have everything I built, but I'm still here. And I'll show them they made the biggest mistake of their lives by underestimating me." In the days that followed, Noah began rebuilding his strength, both physically and mentally. He avoided being seen in public, but every move he made was strategic. He knew the confrontation with Victoria and Charles was inevitable, but before facing them, he needed concrete evidence to incriminate them, and, more importantly, allies to help him turn the tide. The battle was just beginning, and Noah was ready to rise from the ashes, as someone stronger, smarter, and more ruthless than ever before. The time to act had come. After weeks in hiding, observing and gathering information, Noah Kendrick was ready to face Victoria and Charles. He knew that confronting them publicly would be the only way to bring them down for good. With Grace's help, he devised a meticulous plan, choosing a social event where both would be present, a gala hosted by influential investors, many of whom Noah had known before his coma. That evening, Noah dressed impeccably, choosing a simple suit that concealed his physical frailty. Grace helped him prepare, offering words of encouragement. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" she asked as she adjusted his shirt collar. "I have no choice," he replied. "They took everything from me, but they forgot who I am. Tonight I'll remind everyone, especially them." Grace handed him a folder containing the documents they had gathered: fraudulent bank transfers, manipulated contracts, incriminating emails. "This will be your weapon, Noah, but be careful. They won't take this lying down." Noah entered the gala with measured, deliberate steps. The venue was lit by dazzling chandeliers, and the guests were dressed in expensive clothes, laughing and toasting with champagne. He felt their surprised stares as he walked in. Many had believed he was dead. The whispers of his name spread through the room like wildfire. In the center of the hall, Victoria and Charles stood surrounded by investors, their faces lit with smiles that would soon vanish. Noah approached slowly, the sound of his footsteps echoing on the marble floor. As he drew closer, Victoria finally noticed him. The color drained from her face, and Charles froze, as if he'd seen a ghost. "Noah," Victoria murmured, gripping her champagne flute so tightly it seemed it might shatter. "Surprised to see me?" Noah said, his voice firm and laced with sarcasm. "I imagine you are, considering you declared me dead." Charles tried to regain his composure. "Noah, this isn't what you think. We can explain." "Explain?" Noah interrupted, raising the folder in his hand. "Where should I start? Perhaps with the bank transfers, the forged documents? Or should we talk about how you used my absence to steal everything I built?" The tension in the room was palpable. The murmurs stopped, and all eyes turned to them. Victoria tried to interject, but Noah didn't give her the chance. "You, Victoria," he continued, his voice now louder. "The woman I loved, the one I trusted with my life. And you, Charles, my partner, my friend. You betrayed me in ways I can hardly describe. You declared me dead while I was in a hospital fighting to live. You stole my company, my home, and worst of all, my dignity." "That's not true," Victoria shouted, struggling to maintain control. "You don't understand what happened." "Then prove it," Noah retorted, throwing the folder onto a nearby table. The documents spilled out, revealing the evidence of their actions. "These papers tell the real story. Every forged signature, every stolen cent." The guests began to gather around, picking up the documents and reading the evidence with shocked expressions. Charles reached for some of the papers, but one of the investors grabbed his arm, stopping him. "You manipulated everything," one investor said, his voice filled with disbelief. "This is a scandal." Victoria tried again to defend herself, but her words were drowned out by the growing outrage of the crowd. Charles, meanwhile, began slowly backing away, looking for an escape. "Not so fast," Noah said, blocking his path. You think you'll walk away from this? I'll make sure justice is served, no matter what it takes. The night ended with Victoria and Charles being confronted not just by Noah, but by many investors who now demanded answers. Noah, exhausted but triumphant, left the hall with Grace by his side. Back at the hotel, Grace looked at him, a mix of pride and concern on her face. You did it, Noah. But what now? What will you do? Noah sighed, feeling the weight of the day's emotions. I've started to bring them down, but this is just the beginning. There's still so much to reclaim. My fortune, my reputation, and maybe, just maybe, a little peace. Noah Kendrick stood on the hotel balcony, gazing at the city below, his eyes fixed on the flickering lights of the buildings. The gala had exposed Victoria and Charles, and what were once powerful alliances were now rapidly crumbling. Investors were furious, rumors were spreading, and he knew his betrayers would face consequences. Yet the emptiness he felt inside was unexpected. The revenge he had longed for brought no immediate relief. Instead, it raised a question he couldn't ignore. What to do next? Grace entered the room, interrupting his thoughts. She carried 2 coffees and looked at him with concern. Are you okay? Noah took the coffee and sipped it before responding. I think so. I'm just trying to figure out what it means to have my life back, or what's left of it. Grace sat in the chair across from him, her eyes meeting his. You did what you needed to do. You faced the truth, exposed the lies. But what do you really want now, Noah? Do you want total revenge? Or do you want to move forward? Noah knew that was the central question. He had the tools to completely destroy Victoria and Charles. The evidence could bankrupt them and even send them to prison, depending on how he used it. He could hire ruthless lawyers, file lawsuits, and ensure that nothing remained of the life they had built at his expense. But something inside him hesitated. I should want to destroy them, he said, more to himself than to Grace. After everything they did, it feels fair, but it won't bring back the 6 months I lost. It won't restore who I was. So what do you want? Grace asked, her voice calm but firm. The choice is yours, Noah. You can cling to the past or find a way to move forward. Noah spent the next few days deep in thought. He visited his old company, now almost unrecognizable, and spoke to former employees who still remembered him with respect and admiration. Some expressed frustration with the changes under Charles's leadership, while others lamented the direction the company had taken. But what struck Noah the most was realizing that many people still believed in him. It rekindled a spark he thought had been extinguished, the desire to rebuild, not to prove anything to others, but to himself. He also looked into what remained of his fortune. While much had been squandered, there were assets Victoria and Charles hadn't accessed, a property in Aspen, shares in smaller companies, and even a fund in a Swiss bank. It was enough to start over if he wanted to. One morning, Grace found Noah sitting on the bed, papers spread around him. He looked more focused than he had in days. I've made a decision, he said without looking up. I'm moving forward, but first I need to make sure they can't do this to anyone else. Grace seemed relieved. What do you have in mind? I'll expose everything publicly. I'm not going to spend years in endless legal battles. I'll release the evidence to the investors, the press, anyone who cares to see it. They'll lose everything they stole from me, but I won't sink to their level. I won't dedicate my life to chasing them. Grace smiled faintly. That sounds wise, and much more like the Noah you were before. I'm not that Noah anymore, he replied without bitterness. I'm someone different now, someone who understands what really matters. In the days that followed, Noah executed his plan with precision. He released the documents to investors and the media, exposing the truth about Victoria and Charles. The consequences were swift and brutal. Charles lost control of the company and was fired by the board. Victoria was abandoned by her new allies and faced multiple lawsuits. The two were left in ruins, but Noah felt something unexpected: compassion. He didn't interfere when he learned Victoria was selling what remained of her assets to survive. As much as he wanted to hate her, part of him still remembered the love they had shared. With the money he had left, Noah began rebuilding his life. He founded a new company, smaller but with a more meaningful purpose, investing in startups focused on sustainable innovation. He also committed to intensive physical therapy, regaining more and more of his strength. Grace, who had become not just an ally but an invaluable friend, chose to stay by his side as his assistant and advisor. "You don't have to do this alone," she said one day as they reviewed a contract. "Not everyone wants something in return." Noah looked at her, surprised but grateful. For the first time in months, he felt he could trust again. Noah Kendrick would never be the same man who had slipped into a coma, but he accepted that. He understood that the scars, physical, emotional, and financial, were part of who he had become. And as he walked the streets of New York, now a man freed from the weight of his past, he realized something. He had been reborn. Revenge had lost its allure, but the future, with all its uncertainties, shone brightly before him. Months later, Noah Kendrick sat in the meeting room of his new office, gazing out at the vibrant New York City skyline. The space was small but modern, a reflection of the man he had become, practical, resilient, and driven by a greater purpose. He was reviewing reports on the first investments made by his new company, which were already showing promising results. The wounds of his past were still there, but instead of causing pain, they served as constant reminders of his strength. Grace entered the room carrying a folder and 2 coffees. "Good news," she said, placing the papers on the table. "Our first project has already started turning a profit. Looks like your idea to bet on sustainable energy was the right call." Noah smiled, a smile lighter than any he'd worn in months. "It's not just about profit," he said. "It's about impact. I've lost so much, Grace, but gaining this back, knowing I can make a difference, that's worth more than money." She smiled as well, sitting next to him. "You did it, Noah, and the best part is, you did it without destroying anyone in the process. That says a lot about who you are now." Even with his recent successes, Noah knew some things would never return to the way they were. He still heard occasional news about Victoria and Charles. Charles had left New York after losing the company and was facing lawsuits from furious investors. Victoria, on the other hand, was living a simpler life in a small apartment in Brooklyn, far removed from the social circles she once dominated. Noah never tried to contact them, but he knew, on some level, they were paying for their mistakes. But there was one unfinished piece in the puzzle of his new life. One morning, Noah decided to do something he had been putting off for weeks. He walked slowly to a cafe downtown where Victoria was sitting alone with a coffee and a small laptop. She looked tired, a far cry from the woman he had once known, but she still carried an air of dignity. He stopped at her table and Victoria looked up, startled. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, she broke the silence. "Noah, what are you doing here?" Her voice was hesitant but sincere. "I needed to see you," he replied, sitting down without waiting for an invitation. "Not to fight or throw anything in your face, just to understand." Victoria sighed, her gaze shifting to the busy street outside. "I don't know what you want me to say. I made terrible choices. I betrayed you because I thought I could, that you'd never come back. But why?" Noah pressed. "Was it money, power, or something else?" She looked at him, her eyes glistening with tears. "I felt invisible, Noah. For years you were so focused on your company, on success, that you left me behind. Charles was there, listening to me, making me feel important. When you went into a coma, I saw an opportunity to take control for the first time, and I took it." Her words hit Noah hard, but he didn't look away. "Does that justify what you did?" "No," she said quickly. "Nothing justifies it. I ruined everything. I lost you, and in the process, I lost myself." Noah sat in silence for a long moment, processing what she had said. Finally, he took a deep breath and replied, "I won't say I understand, because I don't. But I've learned something over the past few months. Hatred consumed me for a long time, Victoria. I don't want that anymore. Not for me, and not for you." She looked at him incredulous. "Are you saying you forgive me?" He shook his head, a bitter smile on his lips. "Not yet. Maybe someday. But for now, I'm letting it all go. You can move on with your life, Victoria, and I'll move on with mine." Victoria nodded slowly, and for the first time in a long while she seemed genuinely relieved. "Thank you, Noah, for at least trying to understand." As he left the cafe, Noah felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He had closed that chapter of his life, not with anger, but with something far more powerful: acceptance. He returned to his office where Grace was waiting with new projects and challenges. His life was different now. But in many ways, it was more meaningful than ever. He had lost much, but what he had rebuilt was unshakable. With every step forward, Noah Kendrick left the ruins behind, embracing a future where there was no room for regrets, only possibilities. The decision to let go of the past brought Noah Kendrick a sense of clarity he hadn't felt since waking up in the hospital. The life he had rebuilt, though different, finally felt like his own.
Yet as with everything in his journey, nothing came without challenges. His new company was growing steadily, but slowly. The focus on sustainable energy attracted investors who cared not only about financial returns, but also about social impact. In a meeting with a team of young entrepreneurs, Noah saw a reflection of who he had been at the start of his career. Determined, idealistic, but without the wisdom that only adversity could bring. Mr.
Kendrick, one of the young professionals asked, a mix of admiration and nervousness in his voice. Is it true that you faced a coup within your own company? That you rebuilt everything from scratch? Noah smiled, a smile that carried both pain and pride. It's true, and that's why I know how important it is to surround yourself with people you trust. Success isn't just about numbers, it's about character. One evening, Noah returned to the hotel where he had initially hidden with Grace. It was a symbolic gesture, a way to revisit the starting point of his new life. As he walked through the familiar hallway, each step seemed to carry a memory. He opened the door to the room and looked around, absorbing the silence. The small table where he and Grace had pored over incriminating documents was now empty, but its presence still felt strong. Sentimentality doesn't suit you, Grace said, appearing behind him with a teasing smile. But I think I understand. Noah chuckled, something he rarely did months ago. You're right, but sometimes it's good to remember where we started. Grace crossed her arms and watched him with curiosity. And now? What's the next step, Noah? You've got everything you need to keep growing. Are you going to expand the company? Open offices across the country? He shook his head. That's not what I'm looking for right now. I want something more meaningful, something that makes a difference. I don't just want to expand a business. I want to create a legacy. Grace raised an eyebrow, intrigued. A legacy? Yes, Noah said, now looking out the window. It's not about what I build, but what I leave behind for the people who come after me. I want to invest in projects that change lives, that inspire. That's what it's about now. The weeks that followed marked the beginning of a new chapter. Noah decided to use part of his remaining fortune to create a foundation. The idea was simple but powerful: to fund innovative ideas from people who, like him, had to overcome betrayal, loss, and adversity. The foundation became a beacon for entrepreneurs who lacked access to significant resources but had transformative visions. I want this to be more than a business, he explained during the foundation's inauguration. I want it to be a second chance for those who didn't give up, even when everything seemed lost. Because sometimes that's all we need, someone to believe in us. Victoria and Charles became distant memories. Charles had disappeared completely from the corporate scene, while Victoria, to Noah's surprise, began working as a consultant for small businesses. He heard rumors that she had changed, dedicating her time to helping others avoid the mistakes she had made. Noah didn't try to reconnect with her, but deep down, he felt a small sense of satisfaction knowing that she might have found a path to redemption. Looking at everything he had achieved, Noah realized that his rebirth wasn't just about rebuilding what he had lost, but about creating something new, something better. He was no longer defined by his fortune or the name on a corporate building. Now he was defined by the people he helped, the changes he inspired, and the peace he finally felt. Noah Kendrick had lost everything but discovered what truly mattered. And in the end, that was what made him truly free. Years had passed and Noah Kendrick was far from the man who had woken up in the hospital, frail and consumed by confusion. He was now a respected figure, known for his resilience and for turning his personal tragedy into a force for positive impact. The foundation he had created grew year after year, funding projects in education, healthcare, and technological innovation. Each initiative was a reflection of Noah's journey, a testament to how scars from the past could fuel meaningful change. Grace remained by his side, no longer as a nurse but as a loyal partner and friend. They shared a mutual respect forged in the darkest moments of his life. One sunny morning, as they walked across the grounds of a soon-to-be-opened school funded by the foundation, Grace remarked, You know your life's become one big metaphor, right? They knocked you down, and you rose even higher. Noah smiled. Life hasn't been kind to me, Grace. But I think the secret isn't in how you fall. It's in how you choose to get back up. One day, while reviewing a report about a project in Africa, Noah received an unexpected message. Victoria had requested a meeting. He hesitated for a long time before deciding to accept, not out of curiosity or nostalgia, but for closure. The meeting took place at a modest cafe. Victoria looked different, simpler, humbler. Her eyes held a glimmer of remorse that Noah didn't recognize in the woman she once was. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," she said, nervously stirring her coffee with a spoon. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry for what I did to you, to your work, to your life. I destroyed something I never should have touched." Noah listened silently. Her words weren't a surprise, but her tone was. There were no excuses, no attempts to justify her actions, just a sincere plea for forgiveness. "I don't carry anger anymore," Noah said finally, placing his cup back on the table. "I carried it for a long time, but I realized forgiveness was more for me than for you. So yes, Victoria, I forgive you." She looked up, tears streaming down her face. "That means more to me than you could ever know." They didn't dwell on the past. Instead, they spoke briefly about their current lives. Victoria was involved in consulting for local businesses and workforce reintegration programs. Noah realized that in her own way she had also found purpose amid the ruins. When they parted ways, Noah felt a peace he had never experienced before. He had not only overcome Victoria and Charles, he had overcome himself, the man who had once been consumed by anger and a thirst for revenge. Years later, at a ceremony attended by entrepreneurs, activists, and global leaders, Noah Kendrick received an award for his social impact. He stepped onto the stage, and as the audience applauded, he took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. "If I may," he began, addressing the crowd, "I'd like to share a brief story. Many years ago, I woke up in a hospital not knowing who I was or what had happened. I discovered I had lost almost everything: my fortune, my company, my trust in people. But in that moment, I gained something I hadn't valued before: a second chance." He paused, letting the silence settle over the room. "I used that chance to start over. It wasn't easy, and I made many mistakes along the way. But I learned that true success isn't about what we own or achieve. It's about the impact we leave on others. Today, as I look at everything we've built together, I know every step was worth it." The audience rose in applause, but Noah only smiled, feeling whole at last. Noah Kendrick was no longer the man who had once defined his life by power and wealth. He had become something greater, a symbol of resilience, transformation, and redemption. His journey had come full circle, not as a ruin, but as a living force that touched countless lives. And deep in his soul, he knew that, despite everything, he was exactly where he was meant to be. After the award ceremony, Noah returned to his office, where Grace was waiting for him. There was a calmness in the room that seemed to reflect Noah's state of mind. He sat in his chair and gazed out the window, watching the city lights that once symbolized power and ambition. Now, they were merely a backdrop to the meaning he found in his actions. Grace placed an envelope on his desk. "This came for you earlier today. I thought you'd want to read it in peace." Noah opened the envelope. It was a handwritten letter, something rare and almost sentimental. He recognized the handwriting immediately. It was from Victoria. "Noah, I don't expect you to read this in haste, nor do I expect it to change anything in your life. I'm writing simply to say thank you. Thank you for the forgiveness I didn't deserve and for the example you've set for all of us, even when I failed to recognize it. Your foundation has transformed lives, and I'm grateful for the chance to learn from my mistakes and start anew. My life is simple now, but full. I hope yours is too." With all the respect I never knew how to show before, Victoria Noah read the letter again, but this time he felt no bitterness, only a faint touch of melancholy. He placed the letter in a drawer alongside other moments that formed the mosaic of his life. Over the years, Noah's foundation became a global beacon. Initiatives led by his team transformed entire communities, not just financially, but through education, access to technology, and even psychological support for those facing adversity. Noah made a point of visiting some of the projects personally, feeling it was his way of staying connected to the people he was helping. During one of these visits to a small village in Africa where the foundation had funded solar panels, he met a young girl named Amina. She approached him shyly, holding a notebook filled with ideas for a community project. Amina wanted to create a study center for the youth in her village. Noah sat with her and listened to every word, admiring the determination in her eyes. He saw in her a reflection of something he had lost and regained: hope. "Let's make it happen, Amina," he said, shaking her hand. For the first time in a long while, he felt not just like a mentor, but also a student. At 60 years old, Noah Kendrick decided it was time to pass the torch. He called a meeting with his team of directors and announced that he would step down from leading the foundation to focus on writing his story, a book he hoped would inspire others to overcome their own adversities. Grace, now one of the foundation's leaders, looked at him with shining eyes. "Are you sure, Noah? It won't be the same without you." "I'm sure, Grace. The foundation is in excellent hands, and it's time for other stories to be written. I just want to help tell a few of them." Months later, Noah published his book, titled From the Abyss to the Light. It became an instant success, a testament to how life could be rebuilt, even when everything seemed lost. At a book signing, a woman approached him with tears in her eyes. "Mr. Kendrick, your story gave me the courage to leave an abusive job and start my own business. Thank you." Noah smiled, taking her hand firmly. "You did that on your own. I just shared my part of the story." The years that followed were marked by peace and purpose. Noah lived to see his foundation thrive and witness the ripple effects of the impacts he had set in motion. He spent his days surrounded by friends, collaborators, and stories of resilience that reminded him that suffering could be a catalyst for extraordinary things. And so, in the twilight of his life, Noah Kendrick rested, knowing he had left a legacy that would transcend time, not just for what he had built, but for the lives he had touched and transformed. Noah's story wasn't one of vengeance or loss, but of rebirth. He had found what many spend a lifetime searching for, a sense of purpose. And that purpose wasn't in wealth or power, but in the simplicity of helping, creating, and above all, inspiring.